Hey everyone, welcome back to the Schematic channel for one more quick Altium tip. I wanted to do a quick follow-up on the last one about device sheets, these very useful, reusable chunks of circuitry which you can also have as managed sheets in your workspace. The one downside of these and the criticism they've always received from Altium users is, well, that's all nice and everything, but you're not letting us reuse the printed circuit board portion of this as well. Like, the real benefit in reuse is being able to predefine a piece of schematic that has a matching printed circuit board layout. Maybe it's an RF filter, or maybe it's a particular microcontroller and a dense BGA, and you've really worked hard to reduce the number of layers needed on the board side and have proper decoupling with the fan outs and everything. And so, you know, you want to invest that time and then reap it 1,000 times as you use it in many different designs. Altium Designer used to have this feature that's kind of half still not really kind of supported, called Snippets. And that allowed you to take a snippet of the board and a snippet of the schematic, but you had to then do some pretty gnarly work to get those linked again afterwards. Well, after releasing my video, I realized I just ran an update to the Altium Designer 22, and I'm now on 22.4.4.2, and with this release I noticed a new project type appeared on the menu. So let's take a look at that. If I go to File, New, Reuse Block, well, what do you know? Finally, they're catching up with Eagle, which does reuse blocks really well, and pads and others. And finally, Altium's kind of looks like they've made some progress here. So let's explore this and see what it's all about. So I'll start by creating a new reuse block, and I'll see if I can convert something from an existing design into a reuse block. But what I'm looking at here looks like another schematic, so I guess that kind of figures. What I'm expecting is that we draw some schematic that we want to reuse, we lay out the board for it, and then somehow we get to reuse all of that. So here's this new reuse block project. It has a different icon, and if I look at that and if I right click on it, I don't seem to be able to change the name or save as. What I'm looking at here is it has a save, sure, but it's called PCB project new reuse block.prj PCB. So what I'm seeing is that it's just a regular printed circuit board project, same as any other PCB design project in Altium, a .prj PCB. It's got, by default, a basic schematic and a basic board outline, just like any normal new printed circuit board project would have. So how am I going to use this to create a reuse block that's actually useful? Let me try something here. What I'm going to do is go into the DTO1 reference design. I'm pretty sure I have the printed circuit board for that open. So here we are, just switching to that. And this has, it's only a 2-layer board, but it has some kind of reasonable density to it, right? For those that have been around Altium circles long enough, you'll recognize this is the JTAG adapter. And the DTO1 has been broken up into a lot of different subsheets and schematic, but one of them is this microcontroller. And so we have this ARM LPC 2888 microcontroller that's probably not even purchasable anymore. It's so out of date, but just for an example, let's say I've got this whole thing nailed and I want to make a reuse block out of this page. So I'm going to Control A and select everything on this sheet, Control C. We'll see what happens. And I'll go into my reuse block schematic here. And this is probably not big enough to hold the whole thing, so let me go into Properties panel because I want the sheet options to make it bigger. So I'm going to go with it probably needs a ANSI C or something, or A3. Let's just go with C just to be on the safe side, and I can Control V. What do you know? I picked the right sheet size, pretty much. So there's that, the schematic side. Now, I don't know if I can easily grab the same parts of the board. That's going to be a challenge, but let's see what we can do here. So if I go to the MCU schematic, and what I want to do is cross-select. So I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to say cross-select mode should be enabled. That means if whatever I select in schematic, the same thing will be selected in PCB. Okay, so that's enabled now. So I'll do Control A again. So I've selected all of that. Now let me go back to the board. A lot of that isn't going to be needed in the reuse block, but now I have that, I can Control C in the PCB, and let's go Control End to reference it to the actual reference, and then in the new reuse block, right, I'm going to go to Control End and Control V to paste everything. Click to paste. Cancel DRC, I don't care about that for a reusable block right now. Where are we? Okay, well that's way too far out. So let's select all that again and just move it onto the board. Yes. Onto the board. In fact, let's just reset error markers so we can see what we're looking at here. So isn't that interesting? It brought with it the components that were selected, the nets that were selected, so every trace on those nets, not the polygons. It looks like, it brought all the components, all the traces of nets that were selected that I cut out of that sheet. And that outlines there because it's associated with ground. Same with all the ground vias, the stitching vias you see around the edge there and around the USB wiring. So it looks like for all the nets that I selected wires for, it's also retained all the vias. That's kind of not a bad starting point, I guess. I think it looks to me like the main thrust of how this is meant to work is that you start from scratch. Somewhere along the line, Altium, I hope you realize most users will actually already have what they want to reuse from another design. That's why it's called reuse. And they'll want to take a piece and just carve that piece out and use that piece alone and not get all the other stuff that may not be necessary. So nevertheless, this is how it looks like it's going to work. I don't get a board shape or anything. Maybe that doesn't even matter. I probably don't want the surrounding ground outline for the edge plating that was used on this thing. This is the actual board we're looking at, by the way. This went into production. They sold thousands of them. But nevertheless, I digress. What I'm going to do is draw a box and maybe select, what I want to do is select outside area. And I'm going to grab everything that's outside of where the components extremities are. So this looks like R41 down here, this IC7, the crystal oscillator here, and then up to Y1, that other crystal oscillator there. So let's just select everything outside of that and hit delete. Locked and unlocked. That's the other thing, it didn't unlock the things. I should probably unlock everything in here, because if I reuse this in another design, chances are I'm going to modify bits of it here and there anyway. So let's go to properties. Properties, let's unlock. Lock, unlock. Now obviously before turning this into a formal reusable chunk, I'd want to get rid of a bunch of all little bits of traces and things and clean it up real nicely. But I don't need to do that for this, just for demoing it to you. So now what I want to do is hit 1, because I think I don't want a massive board area for this reusable piece. So I'm going to go into edit board shape and just drag these. So please bear with me. There we are. There's the board shape now. So that's my reuse block. Again, pay no attention to the mess of it. Now, what I don't know is, are all the components and nets on the sheet linked to all the components and nets on the board? Let's find out. So to do that, I'll go back to the board and say project component links. Now their reference designators should all be the same. Now, so here's the thing, they're not linked. And what I see is that in pasting into the schematic sheet, it reset all the reference designators to a question mark. So I have no easy way. This is like using snippets again. I don't have an easy way of marrying these up to make sure they're the same. What we actually need, Altium, I'm talking to you, this has to be automated. We need it to keep the board piece and the schematic piece together and keep the component unique IDs and allow them to be linked automatically when putting it into a new reuse block. That's what's needed. So, got a lot of work to do to make this really usable, unfortunately. But here we are. I would go through, relink all the parts, make sure they're married up between board and schematic. Anyway, moving right along, I'll save everything. Now, what can I do with this? How do I reuse this? How do I place a reuse block in another design after I've created it? So if I save this reuse block project, I'm going to go save, right? It's saved it, but I don't get to name it. It's still locally called new reuse block. How do I do this? How can I rename it? I don't know what to do here. I don't even know where it's stored. Maybe I'll go to, nope, I don't even have a right-click explore. So clearly, this whole workflow is geared towards Concord Pro and Altium 365 Workspace. There's absolutely no way of saving this locally. That's what I'm seeing. It's saved locally as a scratch pad. That's what I see. I can't see also in any other design, if I go to, just go to another schematic sheet, for example, and I want to place another reuse block in this design. I go to the place menu. I don't see reuse block. I could say device sheet symbol, but that's looking at my regular device sheet symbol library that's stored locally. Is it in components? Do we treat it like a component? Let's see if it's in my components panel. I've got my managed components in my Altium 365 workspace, but I see other local libraries, good old intlibs, and I also have the Celestial database library, but I don't see my reuse blocks. So that's interesting. Where is it and how do I place it? And the conclusion I can only come to is the only way to use this is to save it to the server. That means put it in your Altium 365 workspace or on a Concord Pro server. So one of the downsides to this approach and these new fancy reuse blocks, which is, it's very promising, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to have to save that to the server. And even then, there's no regular menu I can place it from. Oh, look, it's at least giving me a check. It's saying they're not synchronized. You sure you want to perform save? Well, I'll just cheat at this point and tell you, I've already been through this workflow once, and I do have a reuse block that I already saved in the server. So how does it look? Well, by way of example, let me create a brand new empty project. We'll just call default project. We'll call it reuse block test, RUB test. I'll put it locally because I don't want it cluttering up my workspace. So I'll create a new project and scroll down. There it is. No default schematic. I'm going to add new to project. Yes. Create a schematic. Okay. And then I'm going to also add new to project and create a PCB. Just a default blank PCB, something to work with. Okay, so those are there. Quickly save the project, and while I'm in schematic, oh yeah, it's okay, just save it as the default file name. Save the schematic as the default file name, that's fine, just for demo purposes. Okay, back to the schematic here. Again, on the place menu, I've got nothing linking me to reuse blocks. And I have, yeah, it seems like there's no place, there's nothing on the, yep, nothing on the active bar. So none of that's been updated yet. And again, as we looked, there's nothing in components panel. So the only thing left for me to do is open the Explorer panel, which is kind of a legacy way of interacting with what used to be called the Vault, now Workspaces. And what do you know? It's got a Design Reuse Blocks folder in there. And there's one I created earlier, which has, I think we're actually leveraging Snippets, but it has, this reuse block contains this PCB snippet and this schematic snippet that matches it. Now here's the interesting thing. I can right click on that and place it, just like other assets in the Explorer panel. There's always a right mouse button place menu. Oh, it looks like there's also a new command for creating new reuse blocks too, based on the context of the parent folder. Okay, that's cool. So let's right click and place that. And look at this. It gives me the schematic snippet. The snippet in the schematic. So it's not a device sheet that's being used here. Now, that's the schematic side. What happens if I save my schematic and go to the board? It hasn't placed anything in the board yet. So obviously I still have to go through that synchronization process. So let's go design and import changes from the project, and this should give us what's on the schematic. So it's giving us all these unannotated parts, G question mark, R question mark, U question mark, etc. And the nets and a room. I might not want the room. I would recommend using rooms for reuse blocks because that's what rooms are actually for. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that that we don't have time to talk about. But let's go ahead and execute that. And I'll close the ECO, and what do you know? It's placed the reuse block as a snippet with the room, and all the actual routing and nets has been retained from the reuse block that was released into my workspace. So there you go. There is a new way of doing proper physical design reuse in Altium Designer. It feels like it's not finished yet. Maybe this is currently open beta feature or something. There seems to be no way of using it at all without releasing a reuse block as a managed item into your workspace or a Concord Pro server. So if you don't like using the cloud or don't like buying server licenses for very expensive data management tools, if you're more old school and still prefer to work entirely off your desktop, this is not going to work for you. you're stuck with the old school snippets and old school device sheets for now. But I'm actually kind of impressed how this is working. So thanks for tuning in. I hope this is useful. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like, smash that thumbs up, and ask questions below, make comments below. Tell me what else you would like to see me do, and please subscribe to the channel. You know, Altium's not paying me to do this. This is an act of kindness at this point. So please do support my channel so I can start getting to where I can get something back for my effort. Appreciate you. See you next time.